So today we got a whole bunch of spoilers from Murders at Karlov Manor, so we're going to take a closer look at some of these cards, and we're going to start off with some of the more exciting and flashy ones. We'll get right into it with the first card here, Massacre Girl Known Killer. So this is the newest version of the Massacre Girl, who I believe first appeared in War of the Spark, I think. This one though is a mythic. It's a 4 mana legendary creature human assassin. It's a 4/4. It has menace. It says creatures you control have wither, and whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, if his toughness was less than 1, draw a card. So I think this might be the first time wither has come back in a meaningful way since, what was it, like Shadowmoor or something like that? It's been a long time, but this is pretty cool. So how it works is that wither means your creatures deal damage in the form of -1/-1 counters, and that works with this other ability with whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, if its toughness was less than 1, draw a card, because if any of your opponent's creatures will die in combat, essentially you're going to draw cards because their toughness is going to be reduced from the -1/-1 counters. And this card does seem very good. I'm just a little bit hesitant on it though, because this will really shine in creature-based matchups, but if you're playing against something more control-y that might not play a whole lot of creatures, then this is basically just a 4/4 menace for 4, which is not the worst, but it really needs the opponent to have creatures in order for it to do more than just be a 4/4 with menace, but it's still definitely an interesting card. Here's a pretty cool one. This is another new version of a character we've seen in the past. There's going to be a lot of cards like that today where it's new cards with characters that we've seen from previous sets, but this is Tomic, Wielder of Law. So this is another mythic. It costs 3 mana, 1 a white and a black. It's a 2/4. It has affinity for planeswalkers, so it costs 1 less to cast for each planeswalker you control. It has flying and vigilance, and it says whenever an opponent attacks with creatures, if 2 or more of those creatures are attacking you and or planeswalkers you control, that opponent loses 3 life and you draw a card. So this one, just as a 2/4 flying vigilance for 3, is pretty good. Like, its body alone is quite decent. Affinity for planeswalkers, I'm not sure how relevant that'll be, because it's only going to decrease it by 1, because it can't decrease the colored mana costs, so you could play this for 2 if you already have a planeswalker in play, I guess. And then also its last ability there, it's a card where you kind of need your opponent to make it happen. I see this more as something to deter your opponents from attacking you so much, because they could just not attack you with 2 or more creatures and it won't trigger. But it's a cool card. I'm not sure if it's going to get there in, a standard or modern or anything like that, but it's probably much better in Commander, I think, even though this is in the set proper rather than the Commander set. But it's a cool card, though. Here's Trostani 3 Whispers. So this is the 3rd version of Trostani, I think. The first one was in Return to Ravnica, and then the second one was in, Guilds of Ravnica, I think. But anyway, this is a new Trostani. It costs 3 mana, an interesting mana cost. It costs a green, and then a hybrid either green or white, and then a white, but 3 mana total. It's a 4/4 legendary Dryad. It has 3 activated abilities. You can pay 1 and a green to give a creature death touch till end of turn. You can pay a green or a white to give a creature vigilant till end of turn. And then you can pay 2 and a white to give a creature double strike until end of turn. This does seem good. Just the fact that it's a 4/4/3 is actually, that's quite good. The activated abilities on their own, they don't seem that powerful to me. Like, it's a bit confusing at first to see this at Mythic. I might expect to see this more as a rare, but that kind of leads me to believe this might be more powerful than it seems at first, because it's a mythic and not a rare. I imagine it's probably because, giving a creature just one of these abilities is okay, not great, but the fact that it can allow you to give something all 3 of these abilities is pretty good. So I feel like this one might actually be better than I'm thinking it is. Here's a new version of Tolsimir, which I think is very good. So this one is a rare, not a mythic. Costs 5 mana, 2 green, white, white. It's a legendary elf scout, and it's a 3/2. It has lifelink, and it says, when it enters the battlefield, you make Voja Venstalker, a legendary 5/5 green and white wolf creature token with trample, and then whenever a wolf you control attacks, if Tolsimir attacked this combat, target creature an opponent controls blocks that wolf this combat if able. So this one, it gives you a lot of stats for 5 mana. It basically gives you 8 power and 7 toughness over 2 creatures for 5 mana, which is very good. One of those creatures has lifelink and one of them has trample, and it is kind of removal in a weird way because it does allow you to make one of your opponent's creatures block the Voja there, and the fact that it's a 5/5 means it's probably gonna take out your opponent's creature in combat. So this one I think it is quite good, and I could see it getting there in constructed. And then speaking of Voja, we do have another card here just for Voja itself. It's, separate from the token. This is Voja, Jaws of the Conclave. So this one is a mythic. It costs 5 mana. This is in Naya colors. It costs 2 red, green, white. It's a legendary wolf. It's a 5/5. It has vigilance, trample, and ward 3. And it says when it attacks, put X +1/+1 counters on each creature you control, where X is the number of elves you control. Draw a card for each wolf you control. So this one definitely feels like a mythic to me. This seems like a very powerful card. It's a 5/5 for 5, so it has good stats. It's hard to kill because it has ward 3. It's good for attacking and blocking because it has vigilance. And it has evasion in the form of trample. So that has a lot. But then also, if you control even just one elf, you're going to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control when it attacks. And then this is a wolf, so whenever it attacks, you're going to draw at least one card. So the floor for this card is very high, I believe, and then its upside is pretty crazy if you can have multiple wolves or elves. I think this is a very powerful card. Here is Melik, Reforged Researcher. So I think the last time we saw Melik was in Return to Ravnica, I want to say, and I think that one costs 7 mana and it was a rare. This one costs 5 mana. It's Izzet colors, so blue and red. This one is a mythic. It's a star. It's a legendary weird detective. It's an interesting creature type. It says its power and toughness are each equal to twice the number of instant and sorcery cards in your graveyard. The first instant or sorcery you cast each turn costs 3 less to cast, so that's a big discount. And with this costing 5 mana, by the time you get to 5 to cast this, I imagine you're probably going to have at least 2 or 3 instant and sorceries in your graveyard, so it's probably going to come into play as, a 6/6 plus or something like that. So this one does seem quite good, I think. I feel like this, if there is a deck that would want a card like this, I could potentially see it getting there in constructed. It definitely will be good in Commander, but I feel like this one might have potential in constructed. Here's a character I don't think we've seen on a card before. I'm not sure. This is Kylogg's Visionary Inventor. This one costs 7 mana, also in Izzet colors. It's 5, a blue and a red. It's a legendary Viashino Artificer. It's a 4/4 with Menace, Ward 2, and Haste. And it says, whenever it attacks, sacrifice any number of other creatures, then exile the top X cards of your library, where X is their total power. You can cast any number of instant and or sorceries from among the exiled cards without paying their mana costs. This one it scares me a little bit, actually, because you just cast the instants and sorceries for free. And if you just sacrifice one creature, if you've been able to set up the top of your library, I feel like you can do some pretty broken stuff. This does cost 7 mana, so it is quite high up there on the mana curve, but it seems quite powerful to me. I think this is going to be really good in Commander. I don't think it's going to do anything in Standard really, but I think this is probably going to shine in Commander. Here's a creature that I'm particularly excited about. This is a new Krenko. I'm a big fan of Krenko and goblins in general. This is Krenko, Baron of Tin Street. So as Krenkos go and legendary goblins in general seem to cost, this costs 3 mana. It's 2 and a red. It's a legendary goblin. It's a 3/3 with haste, and you can tap it and sacrifice an artifact to put a +1/+1 counter on each goblin you control. It also says whenever an artifact is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you can pay a red. If you do, you make a 1/1 red goblin creature token. It gains haste until end of turn. I think this card is really good. So this has a lot going for it. So first of all, it's a 3/3 haste for 3 in red, which is good. In a mono red aggro deck, that's almost good enough just on its own, but it has a lot of other synergies packed into it here. So you can tap and sack an artifact to put a +1/+1 counter on each goblin you control. So that does count for itself, so it can grow itself. There are tons of different types of artifacts you might just have laying around, like, clues, treasures, foods, all of that kind of stuff. But then the third ability, though, it says whenever an artifact is put into the graveyard from the battlefield. That doesn't say whenever an artifact you control, so if any player puts an artifact into the graveyard from the battlefield, this will trigger, and you can pay red. And if you do, you make a 1/1 goblin with haste. But also, though, say you do use its ability to sacrifice an artifact. You activate that ability, you sacrifice the artifact, that's going to trigger the third ability. So before the second ability resolves, the third ability will be put on the stack, and you will be able to pay a red. If you do, you'll make the 1/1 goblin, and then when the previous ability resolves, you're going to put a +1/+1 counter on that goblin. So you're going to have a 2/2 hasty goblin. So, there are a lot of cards like this, like, previous Krenkos. There's a Legion Warboss, there's a Goblin Ravelmaster, things like that. These 3 mana aggressive goblins that tend to have haste. As far as this one goes, I feel like this potentially could be the best of them so far. It's hard to say without playing it at first, but this is a very powerful card. And that's going to lead me into this uncommon, which works very well with it. This is Crime Novelist. This is a 1/3 for 3 mana in red. It's a creature goblin bard. And it says whenever you sacrifice an artifact, put a +1/+1 counter on Crime Novelist and add a red. So this is really easy to trigger. You just sacrifice a treasure to get mana, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and then you add a red. I feel like there are going to be so many combos with this card. There's going to be many ways to go infinite with it, I believe. The ceiling for this card, I think, is so high. I'm very interested to see what kind of combos are going to come up with this card. So we're going to go back to a mythic here. This is Aurelia's Vindicator. It costs 4 mana, 2 a white and a white. It's a 4/2 with flying, lifelink, and ward 2. It has Disguise X, 3 and a white. So I believe how Disguise works is that you can cast it. It's very similar to Morph, so you could cast it face down as a 2/2 with ward 2 for 3 mana. And then you can turn it face up for its disguise cost. It says when it's turned face up, you can exile up to X other target creatures from the battlefield and or creature cards from graveyards, and then when it leaves the battlefield, return the exiled cards to their owner's hands. So this reminds me a lot of Angel of Serenity from Return to Ravnica, and one thing that was cool that you could do with that is normally when you look at a card like this, you would want to exile your opponent's creatures to get rid of them, but since you can exile things from graveyards, you can exile your creatures from your graveyards, and then when this creature goes away, it dies or leaves the battlefield or whatever, you're going to get those cards back to your hand. So that's a cool little trick that you can do with cards like this. So this one does feel like a mythic. I think is very powerful. I feel like it's probably gonna find a home in at least one deck. Here's another mythic, which is another version of a creature we've seen in the past. This is Agris Kos, Spirit of Justice. Costs 4 mana, 2 a red and a white. It's a legendary spirit detective. It's a 2/4. It has double strike and vigilance. And it says, when it enters the battlefield or attacks, choose up to 1 target creature. If it's suspected, exile it. Otherwise, suspected. And a creature that is suspected has menace and it can't block. One thing that I think is cool with suspecting something is that it could be good to do that to your own creature, because you could just give your creature menace, which could be quite powerful. But this could be very good as like a top end card in a red-white aggressive deck, because as soon as it comes into play, it's going to make something unable to block if you target your opponent's creature, and then whenever it attacks, you can do that again and just take out all of your opponent's blockers. But you could also, suspect your own creatures, like I mentioned, and make them harder to block. Here's a new version of Atrada. This one is a mythic. It's a 1/4. This is Atrada Deadly Fugitive. It costs 3 mana, 1 a blue and a black, and it's a legendary vampire assassin. It has Death Touch, and it says face down creatures you control have 2 blue and a black. Turn this creature face up. If you can't exile it, then you may cast the exiled card without paying its mana cost. And also, whenever an assassin you control deals combat damage to an opponent, cloak the top card of that player's library. So I believe what that means is it's very similar to the manifest mechanic. So basically, you're going to put the top card of the opponent's library into play, I think, under your control as a 2/2 with ward 2. And then basically the second ability on Atrada here, the one that lets you turn things face up, That works well with the cloaking stuff because, normally if you were to cloak a non-creature, you wouldn't be able to turn it face up, but with this one, you could use this activated ability and then just cast the card instead. Here is Izani, Center of the Web. So this one I think is also back from Guilds of Ravnica, or maybe it's Ravnica Allegiance. Anyway, this is a 5/4 legendary elf detective. It costs 6 mana for a black and a green. It has Menace, and it says whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, you may collect evidence for. If you do, you make 2/2/1 black and green spider creature tokens with Menace and Reach. Also, you can sack 4 tokens and surveil 2, then draw 2 cards and gain 2 life. So with collect evidence, it means you can exile cards from your graveyard that equal that much converted mana cost, I believe. So when it enters the battlefield or attacks, if you exile stuff from your graveyard that has mana cost 4, you can make 2 spiders. So that'll get you 2 tokens, so you're halfway to what you need to be able to sack 4 tokens to surveil 2, draw 2, and gain 2. But this seems pretty cool. It does seem very similar to the previous version of Izani, but I think it's probably a good card. Here's a new version of Judith. This one is much bigger than the previous one. This costs 5 mana. It's Judith Carnage Connoisseur, and it's a 3/4 human shaman. It says, when you cast an instant or sorcery, choose one. That spell gains Death Touch and Lifelink, or you make a 2/2 red imp creature token with when this creature dies, deals 2 damage to each opponent. So this one is cool, but I feel like the previous Judith might be better. It's not to say this card is bad, but it's a 3/4 for 5, so it's the stats on his body are not the best for 5 mana, and it doesn't do anything until you cast other cards, so it's probably going to be hard to trigger this the same turn that you play it. But if you get to untap with it, you could do some cool stuff. Giving a spell Death Touch and Lifelink means you could just like shock something and kill it and gain some life. You could play like End the Festivities and just wipe your opponent's board and gain a bunch of life. That would probably be pretty fun. That actually sounds like a pretty cool idea to me. So if I think of that scenario, it does make me like this card more actually. So here's the first Planeswalker that we're going to look at. This is Kaya, Spirit's Justice. Costs 4 mana, so 2, a white and a black. It comes into play with 3 loyalty. It has a very wordy first ability here. It says, whenever one or more creatures you control and or creature cards in your graveyard are put into exile, you may choose a creature card from among them. Until end of turn, target token you control becomes a copy of it, except it has flying. So you can +2 to surveil 2 and exile a card from a graveyard. You can +1 to make a 1/1 white and black spirit creature token with flying, or you can -2 to exile a creature you control. For each other player, exile to 1 creature that player controls. So it does do what you typically want out of Planeswalkers in that it can protect itself by making tokens. It can get you basically card advantage by surveilling 2 and then exiling stuff from graveyards, and then you can trigger its first ability. It's not exactly card advantage, but it can be if used in the right way, and then it also can remove creatures by -2ing to exile something. It does only come into play with 3 loyalty for 4 mana, so it feels a little bit low on loyalty on that end, but it's a cool card and there is a lot going on here, so I feel like this is one that you would need to play to fully get a grasp of how it's going to work, because it is kind of a complicated card, but I feel like it has potential. Here's Kellen back again in what seems like another very medium card. There's many versions of Kellen at this point, and none of them really excite me that much. Like, they're fine. But for Kellen to appear so frequently, I kind of expected to do more. But anyway, this one costs 4, 2, a green and a blue. It's a 3/4 human fairy detective. It has an adventure on it, so you can cast the adventure for a green and a blue. You investigate. You can play an additional land this turn. Then also, Kellen has flying and vigilance, and whenever it attacks, destroy up to 1 artifact. If you controlled that permanent, draw a card. So, it's okay. Like I was saying, it seems very medium. It's not a bad card, but outside of being good and limited and being alright in some commander decks, I'm not sure what else it's really doing, but we have more Kellens anyway. Here's a card I am more excited about though. Analyze the Pollen. I think this card could be very good potentially. So it just costs a green, 1 mana, it's a sorcery, it's a rare. It says, as an additional cost to cast the spell, you can collect evidence 8. So exile cards with total mana value 8 or greater from your graveyard. Search your library for a basic land card. If evidence was collected, instead search your library for a creature or land, reveal that card and put it into your hand, then shuffle. So, for just 1 mana, this is mana fixing. You can search your library for a basic land, but if this is a bit later in the game and you can collect your evidence, this is a 1 mana tutor that allows you to get any creature or land out of your deck, which is really powerful. It reminds me a lot of Traverse the Ulvenwald, which was a good card back in Standard. It saw play in Modern too. I think this card definitely could get there, and I'm interested to see how this one is going to play out. Here's the first reprint we've looked at. We've got a reprint of Assassin's Trophy, which is pretty cool. I mean, this card is definitely played quite a bit, and now we're going to get it back in Standard again. So, more Assassin's Trophies to go around is probably a good thing. So, yeah, that's a pretty exciting reprint. Here's Axebane Ferox. This is a 4/4 for 4 mana. It costs 2 green. It's a creature beast, so very simple creature type. Has Death Touch and Haste, and Ward, collect evidence 4. So your opponent will have to exile cards with mana cost 4 or greater from the graveyard if they want to target this. So it's a good card. It's kind of similar to like the Nullhide Ferox from the previous Ravnica set. It's definitely good, but by today's standards, it is lacking a little bit, which sounds weird to say because, it's a 4/4 Death Touch Haste for 4 with upside. I don't know, maybe this is better than I'm thinking it is, but I kind of feel like the ward cost probably will be pretty easy to pay. We'll see though. Maybe this card will be quite good. But notably also, this is the bundle promo, so you'll get one of these in every bundle that you buy. There's this card here, Homicide Investigator, and you can see there's 2 versions of this. There's the regular one and one of the showcase ones, which is the I guess the dossier style one. And I had talked about this style briefly in my previous video about Karlov Manor, but seeing it on the card here, I don't like this showcase style because this really makes it look like this is a white card when it's not. This is a black card. But in the showcase style, that just looks like a white card, just with a black mana symbol on it. Anyway though, this is a 2/2 for 2. It's a human detective. It says whenever 1 or more non-token creatures you control die, investigate. This ability triggers only once each turn. So it's pretty good. It'll be good in limited for sure, but in terms of abilities like this, I feel like there are better ones, like the kind of like sort of aristocrat type abilities where things happen when your creatures die or just when any creatures die. This one isn't bad, but I feel like we've seen better versions of this kind of effect. Here's a pretty cool uncommon. This is one of the promos that you can get in the promo packs. So this is Long Goodbye. It's an instant for 1 and a black. This spell can't be countered. Destroy target creature or planeswalker with mana value 3 or less. So pretty flexible removal. 3 or less, it does put a cap on it, but for 2 mana and instant speed, being able to destroy creatures or planeswalkers, it's a pretty good removal spell. It's not the best that we've seen, but I feel like, at the very least, this could be a pretty decent sideboard card. And here's another one of those promo cards here, No More Lies. This is 2 mana, so a white and a blue instant. It says counter target spell, unless its controller pays 3. If that spell is countered this way, exile it instead of putting it into its owner's graveyard. So this is basically a side grade to Mana Leak. It's Mana Leak, except it costs white and blue instead of just 1 and blue. But it exiles stuff. So, that could be very relevant, exiling things, but basically we kind of have Mana Leak in Standard now, so that's pretty cool. Here's the newest Wrath that we have, No Witnesses. So this costs 4 mana, it's 2 a white and a white, it's a sorcery. Each player who controls the most creatures investigates, then destroy all creatures. So this one I think this is very good, right? Because for a long time, it seemed like 4 mana was kind of ruled out for Wraths, because we were playing with 5 mana Wraths for a long time, but for the past couple of years, we've seen 4 mana Wraths that kind of give the opponent a little bit of advantage for, for having all of their creatures destroyed. Not necessarily an advantage, but they get, a little something in return, and this is what this does. Probably they're going to have the most creatures, so they're going to investigate, but that's definitely worth it for just destroying all creatures for 4 mana, so I think this is a very good Wrath. Here's a new version of Teysa, and you can see here this is an example of one of the serialized cards, so we're getting more serialized cards in this set. This one costs 3 mana, it's 1 in white and a black, it's a legendary human advisor, and it's a 2/3 with Death Touch. It says at the beginning of your end step, investigate for each opponent who lost life this turn. Whenever a clue you control is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, you make a 1/1 white and a black spirit creature token with flying. This ability triggers only once each turn. So 2/3 Death Touch for 3 mana, that's a good body, and then probably your opponent will have lost life the turn you play this. I imagine you can go like 1-drop, 2-drop this on turn 3. So assuming this triggers the turn you play it, you're going to get a 2/3 Death Touch for 3 and a clue token, and then next turn when you sack that clue, you're going to draw the card from the clue, but also get a spirit. So I think this card has a lot going for it. It's, you know, kind of a pretty good value engine going on here. I think this one is pretty decent. This card is very cool. War Leader's Call. This is an enchantment. It costs 3 mana, 1 a red and a white. It says creatures you control get +1/+1, and whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, this does 1 damage to each opponent. So this is like 2 cards mashed together. This is Glorious Anthem plus Impact Tremors all in one. This only costs 3 mana in this one card, so I think this is very good. This does a lot packed into one card, and in a red-white aggressive deck, I think this could be really powerful. So here's an example of one of the new types of cards. This is a case, so it looks very similar to like the classes from the Adventures in the Forgotten Realms set, or looks a lot like a saga, but this is an enchantment. It's a case. So this is Case of the Ransacked Lab. It costs 3 mana, 2 and a blue. It says instants and sorceries you cast cost 1 less. And then in order to solve this case, you must have cast 4 or more instant or sorcery spells this turn. It says if unsolved, solve at the beginning of your end step. So, you know, you cast 4 or more instants and sorceries at the beginning of your end step, you solve this. I believe that's how it would work. And then when it's solved, whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you draw a card. So in a Spellslinger deck, this could be really good, actually. I feel like this is probably going to be one of the better cases. Yeah, especially in Commander, I think this one is probably going to do a lot of work. And now we've finally reached the rare land cycle. So we have a new cycle of rare lands. These ones are interesting because they do have the basic land types. So, you know, say for example, the red-white one is a mountain and plains. They all come into play tapped, and they all say when they enter the battlefield, surveil 1. So these are good. They're not the most powerful of these kinds of cards that we've seen, but in terms of standard play, these are going to be good. It is a really big drawback that they come into play tapped, but surveilling 1 when they come into play is quite good. It's similar to, say, the Temples, which scryed 1, but I feel like usually surveilling is better than just scrying, so they have that going for them, but then also they have the basic land types, so you could not only compare them to the Temples in the past, you could also compare them to the Amonkhet lands, the ones that cycled, where they come into play tapped all the time, they have the basic land types, and you can pay 2 to cycle them. So I basically see these as slightly better than the Amonkhet lands. I feel like these are much better, these are way better than Temples, and then they're slightly better than the Amonkhet lands, so these are good. They're going to see play in Standard, I believe, but outside of that, I feel like there are better lands that you would play. Even in Commander, there are many better lands, but these do have the basic land types, so they have that going for them. And then lastly, we're going to look at the special guest cards that we have for this set. So these ones, they're good cards. They're a little bit less exciting, I think, than the Ixalan ones, mainly because in Ixalan we had a really big one in Mana Crypt, but in this, I guess the biggest one is probably like Field of the Dead, I want to say. So we've got Ghostly Prison, Fabricate, Show and Tell, Tragic Slip, Victimize, Gamble, Crashing Footfalls, Tireless Tracker, Drown in the Lock, and then Field of the Dead. So these are all pretty cool. I imagine the worst one to open probably would be Tragic Slip, because it's, you know, it's a common, right? So there's not really going to be much value there probably, but it's a cool card anyway. But then outside of that, I feel like all of these have at least some value. And Show and Tell is quite up there as well. I'm not sure if that's more or less than Field of the Dead, but these are some pretty cool special guests. So if you want these cards, you can get them in this new fancy alternate art. So that's going to wrap up the cards that we're looking at for today, there were a lot of interesting ones, I think. And that's not even all the cards that were spoiled today. There were a bunch more, lots of commons and uncommons and things like that. So there is more to look at as well. But let me know what you think of these cards in the comments. Are there any in particular that you're excited about? Any that I didn't talk about that maybe you thought I should have? Or if there's something that I missed about any of the cards I did talk about, let me know that as well. But anyway though, if you're still watching, thanks for watching. It'd be cool if you can like and subscribe and all that kind of stuff. I'd encourage everyone to come join my Discord server. You can find a link to that in the video description below. And also, if you'd like to pre-order any of these cards, you can do that by going to facetofacegames.com. They are the largest Magic store in Canada. They're also a sponsor of the channel, and you can use code 8thPlaceDave at the checkout to save 5% on your order. And you can even get free shipping on qualified orders Canada-wide, but they do also ship internationally for single cards as well. Also, I'd just like to take a moment to thank all of the patrons that support me on Patreon. But otherwise though, thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.